Everybody knows that war is hell, but does that mean if war is hell, that the soldiers are all devils and fiends? Actually, it doesn't. They're just folks like you and me, no better and no worse than anybody else, about as good as we can expect people to be, uh, although they do terrible things. I want to talk a little bit more about that contradiction. So, hello, my name is Doug Lummis, and this is the fifth in a series of talks I'm giving titled War is Hell? Yeah, Meditations of an Ex-Marine. It's true. The soldiers, if even though war is hell, the soldiers are just regular kids, most of them minors, or many of them certainly, right out of high school. Uh, just folks. And for the commanders and the trainers, that's a problem. Uh, they're what many of them imagine would be a better arrangement would be if they actually had battalions of fiends out there, but they don't. And especially the people who feel that most intensely are the drill instructors. They get a group of 30 or 50 people, young men, these days a few young women as well, right out of, most of them right out of high school, who have volunteered for the Army or the Marines. They look at them and they know that no matter how tough those people imagine that they are, uh, they won't be able to operate efficiently on the battleground unless I, the drill instructor, change them in some way. Change them in some way means make them capable of killing other people, people that they don't know and have no particular personal grudge with, without that having a bad effect on their health. So, how do you train young men and hopefully women too? That is, that's what the drill instructors hope uh, to behave like, to do the work that could be more easily done by fiends. To illustrate this, I want to introduce to you a very interesting book that was published in 1947 by the Army historian. Let's see, what was his rank? Brigadier General S.L.A. Marshall. A book called, he published a book in 1947 called Men Against Fire. And he doesn't mean firefighters, he means people engaged in firefights, people who fire at other people and are fired at uh, by guns and pistols and rifles. And he this book is the report of a survey that S.L.A. Marshall did right after World War II, in which he interviewed many of the thousands and tens of thousands of young men coming back from the European or the Asian battlefields on what it was like and how they behaved during uh, in actual firefights. He asked them, uh, when you were at the front, did you ever actually point your gun at a person that you could see and pull the trigger with the intention of sending a bullet through that person's body? And they answered, according to him, that no more than 15 to 20% of the respondents, the people who answered that question, said they actually shot at another person. Most of them said they avoided it. They shot aiming at the sky or aiming into the dirt, but not at a person. And Marshall, it's interesting. He was ambivalent about this. On the one hand, he says this is a credit to our nation, by which he means America, that most Americans are nice people that don't like to kill other people, and they have a resistance in somewhere deep in their consciousness, many of whom didn't actually know that they had that resistance until it came to the crucial moment when they had to make a decision, pull the trigger or not. And many of them wouldn't or couldn't pull the trigger. Uh, some people say that Marshall exaggerated his statistics. I'm no judge of whether that's true or not, but I do know that the book had a very real effect on the manner of training people for infantry work. That is training people to become capable of actually shooting other people. This is 15 or 20% is a terrible success rate. Imagine spending all that money on training millions of soldiers and sending them off to do some work at a huge expense and great danger to your country, and only 15 or 20% of them actually do the work, and the others don't. That's shocking inefficiency, and from the standpoint of the trainers and the commanders, that has got to be improved. And they changed the training methodologies uh, to improve it. One of the ways that they did that was by changing the training on the firing range. When I was in the Marines, our rifle training, they taught us to shoot the M1, was the rifle in those days. To shoot it accurately, we shot at bullseyes, those concentric rings. You try and hit the ball in the center. If you get a ball in the center, uh, that's the highest score. And to do that, you have to very carefully and very quietly pull the trigger. They said it's like squeezing a lemon. You don't jerk it, you squeeze it, just increasing the pressure slowly so that you won't actually know when the gun will go off. If you know exactly when it's going to go off, in other words, if you jerk the trigger, you joggle the gun and the bullet goes way off the target. So you've got to be surprised by the bullet firing. And then in that case, it will accurately go to the bullseye. So we were using single shot rifles, and in this with a single shot rifle is there's only one bullet per uh, firing, and so it's very important that it hits the target. So they changed that to pop-up targets, and in this new system, you you hold the automatic weapons that they use, which fire a burst with each jerk of the trigger. You hold that at hip level. You walk across a field, and planted here and there on the field, there are pop-up targets shaped like human bodies, armed enemy soldiers. So you're walking along, and suddenly a target pops up, and as soon as it pops up, you pull the trigger and fire the automatic weapon in the general direction. You fire a burst, and one or more of those bullets will surely hit the target. And firing, instead of becoming in the way that we were trained on the bullseye range, it's a very thoughtful, you have a quiet moment in which you have time to think about what you're doing. And little by little, and you don't know when the gun's going to go off exactly, and it goes bang, and then it's over. Uh, and it's easy to see why if you're maybe catching the other person's eye during that moment, or you're seeing that it's a person of your own age and maybe looks like your next door neighbor, you hesitate and don't actually shoot. But if it becomes not a thoughtful process, it's changed into a conditioned response. Pop, bang, like that. The pop-up target pops up, and instantly, without thinking, without having a moment to ponder what you're doing, you do what you're told, and you go, and they say that during the Vietnam War, the U.S. Shooting rate, the statistic that SLA Marshall got for the Second World War in the Vietnam was greatly improved. That shooting became a conditioned response, and many fewer. The number of soldiers that avoided shooting at somebody during that war was much lower. And that training, that shift to conditioned response shooting is probably part of the reason. But there's another reason, and that's called distancing. The trainers call it the distancing. And that's what I want to talk about today. Distancing is something that's been known for a long time among people with infantry battle experience. but he got his maybe his first careful analysis by another uh, officer who was a scholar. That was what was his rank, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who wrote a book in the 90s called On Killing, a very unusual subject to study in this manner about exactly this problem, how hard it is to kill somebody and how to get around that and solve that problem, because for the military, it's a problem. And Dave Grossman points out a whole lot of people who he points out a whole lot of examples by people who've been in battle situations where the enemy that you're trying to shoot is visible, and says that there are a whole lot of testimonies that of people who when they fired the gun and the bullet successfully went into the other person's body and the other person maybe screamed or whatever and fell down and wriggled around as people do when they're full of bullets. And the person who fired the bullet is horrified by what he did and sometimes bursts into tears, yeah, hard soldiers, but starts to cry or throws his rifle down on the ground or screams or shouts, I'm sorry, or vomits or faints. And when that happens, uh, typically the sergeants are used to this because it happens so often. The sergeant will come over to the guy and say, "It's okay, buddy. It's okay. It happens all the time. This won't be held against you. You'll get used to it. Little by little, you'll get used to it." That's why they say nobody becomes a true warrior who can actually battle the way you're supposed to until they've had the experience of doing it and gone through this shock, this tr transformation of your self-image that you have to go through to become approach a little bit the ability that it comes naturally to a fiend or a devil. Uh, and he says, uh, Dave Grossman in this book says that one of the very important things that helps you to get over this is what he calls distancing. And he divides distancing, first of all, into physical distancing and emotional distancing. Everybody sort of knows that everybody can understand that it's easier, for example, to drop bombs from an airplane on a city where you can't see the people very clearly and you can't hear them, their voices or anything. Between that and a level battlefield where the enemy is close enough, you can maybe, if you're not careful, catch his eye. It's much harder in the latter case. So distancing, that's physical distancing. If your artillery is easier in that way than being on the absolutely front line with your rifle facing other people with rifles on the other side. But then he says there's other kinds of distancing, and that's the distancing. Uh, how does he divide it? Uh, Racial differences, religious differences, uh, class differences. If you think the person is of a inferior race, or if you think the person is a believer in a mistaken religion, or if you think the person is in a lower class than you are, they become very easy, much easier, not very easy, much easier uh, to kill. And drill instructors use this technique. Uh, they have used it for years. It goes way back. Different kinds of prejudice. None of this is written in the training manuals. Of course, the trainers would get in trouble. The army itself would get in trouble if it was known that they were doing this intentionally. It's a skill that's handed down by oral tradition from uh, younger, newly recruited drill instructors watching and listening to the techniques of their seniors. And they're very, very skillful at inventing different ways of different terms to categorize and stereotype the enemies. Now, when I was in the Marines, our most of our if there were the veterans, the people who had been in wars, I came in right after the end of the uh, Korean War, and so the very older, so there were a few people, veterans of World War II, who had fought against the Japanese, and uh, my two platoon sergeants had fought in the Korean War. Uh, and so, and it was the people that we were invited then to imagine that we would fight with in the next war were Chinese. And so there was a term that included all of them without distinction, and that was gook. They were all gooks, not just the Chinese, but everybody in Asia, pretty much. Sometimes dinks, but mostly gooks. It was interesting that I shouldn't say interesting, but worth noticing maybe that the Japanese, who were supposed to be our allies, were also called gooks. Okinawans, who were supposed to be our allies, uh, or at least a friendly people, were also gooks. Oh, usually they were not called that to their face, but when there was none of them around, that was what they were called. Uh, After that, at the time of uh, after we started fighting people in the Middle East, Arabs, There was another long list which I have written down here. Arabs, okay. Ragheads, sand niggers, dune coons, sand monkeys, camel fuckers, all very clever. Some of them rhythmic, very easy to repeat, and many others. I suppose that now, since the enemy they're imagining, we're supposed to imagine fighting against next is Chinese, that I don't know the list. I haven't done the survey to ask any GIs what they call the Chinese these days. But I'm sure there's another list just as long and just as clever and just as useful in preparing people to think of those as killable, easy to kill lives not particularly worth anything anyway, that sort of thing. One of the sayings was, life is cheap in Asia. And that was a way of, on the one hand, it was supposed to mean that Asians don't value life very much, which is, of course, totally false. But the other is, so it's okay for us not to value their lives. We don't have to worry about that, which probably does have some effect. Not much, but some. The problem with that method uh, is not from the standpoint of the trainers and the commanders. The problem with that method is not that it's unethical. I don't think they care about that much. The problem with it is that it's false. It's a falsehood. And those terms don't describe those people's culture in, they don't even attempt to. They're just names. I doubt if one in 10,000 Middle Easterners has ever ridden a camel in this day and age, for example. But there's the real danger, the danger in the combat zone, is something that I have named distance collapse. There's this sudden revelation that's recorded both in, for example, Dave Grossman's books and also in fiction and documentary records of experiences in battle, of the sudden realization that this person that you're killing or that you just killed is just regular folks, just some guy, and or sometimes some lady that pretty much like yourself. I'll give a couple of examples. One of the great novels, one of the first great anti-war novels, came out of the First World War, was written by Eric Maria Remarque, called All Quiet on the Western Front. And one of the most memorable moments in that novel, Mark Remarque was a German soldier fighting on the side of Germany against the French. So for Americans, an enemy. But anyway, it's based on his experience. In that novel, the protagonist, whose name is Paul, is running across a field and it comes under bombardment. And to protect himself, he jumps into a bomb crater. He jumps into the bomb crater, and a French soldier running across the same field, also to protect himself, jumps into the same bomb crater. And Paul does what he's trained to do and does automatically. He takes out his knife and he stabs him and gives him what's called a mortal wound. But unlike in the movies, where one bullet kills you, leaving just enough time for you to say something clever before you die, uh, actually, one knife wound or several knife wounds may take an hour or a couple of hours to kill you. And here they are stuck in the same bomb crater, and the Frenchman is bleeding and gurgling and weeping and dying. And there's no way for Paul to put a distance between him and the guy. And he suddenly has an insight or an epiphany. He looks and he catches the eye of the Frenchman, and the Frenchman looks at him in horror. And he sees that he's just like somebody walking down the street in your hometown, just anybody. And then little by little, he starts to cry and he starts to talk to the guy and he says, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to kill you. I didn't have a reason to kill you. Uh, I didn't want to do it. I just thought you were an abstraction. And now I know that you're just real, a person." And then the guy dies and Paul takes out his wallet and finds a picture of his wife and his one or two kids. I can't remember the number. And she's standing in front of their home, which is also their shop. And the guy he killed is a printer by trade. And Paul says, "Oh my God, what can I do? I'll have to spend the rest of my life uh, taking care of this woman and raising the children because it's my responsibility that they don't have a father anymore. And I'll have to do this and I'll have to do that and little by little he realized that he's lying, that he cannot and will not do that. And the bombing ceases and he says, "Well, war is war," and walks away. It's interesting. I want to introduce another novel that has a similar scene. Maybe this is something that really happens uh, often enough on a battlefield. This was written by a North Vietnamese soldier who was fighting against South Vietnam during the Vietnam War, named Bao Ninh, Baoninch. And it's called the English, it's translated into English, and the title is The Sorrow of War. And similarly, the protagonist, the author of this novel, was actually a soldier in that war and was his he was half crazy when he was writing this novel, fighting against his madness, going in and out of fantasies and uh, uh, sudden recollections, nightmares, and writing the novel about this, uh, uh, basically based on his own experience, was the way he was keeping himself sane. He said the hero, the protagonist in this story, is again running across a field, being bombarded, jumps into a bomb uh, bomb crater, and a South Vietnamese soldier jumps in on top of him. He takes out his knife and gives him a mortal wound, stabbing him in the neck and the chest. And then the fellow doesn't die, but keeps looking at him and gurgling, spitting blood. And he again starts shouting, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I'll find you some bandages. I'll look for a medical kit. Wait for me. I'll be right back." And he runs around looking for a medical kit. In the meantime, a huge rainstorm comes in, and all the bomb craters are filled to the brim, which means that the fellow he was trying to save drowned. And he says, every time it rains now, I think about that. That poor fellow drowned because of me. And he's haunted to the rest of his life. Uh, it's called The Sorrows of War. You can order it from some bookstore that delivers books. The point is that no matter how tough you think you've gotten, you can suddenly have an insight. The trouble with that toughness is it's grounded in a falsehood that this person's life doesn't matter. And suddenly you are attacked by the truth, which is a truth, and it just doesn't go away because you refuse to acknowledge it. It remains true that that other person's life is has the same value as yours or that of anybody else. And what you have done is horrendous. Now, you may think, and some people have claimed, that this kind of tenderness, this kind of sympathy for the other, this kind of ability to look at the situation from the standpoint of the other, is one sign of the weakening, the feminization, the womanization of modern man. That in the old days, the old warriors that we read about in the old books weren't that soft, and they never experienced anything like post-traumatic stress disorder. Certainly not shell shock. Well, they never no shells in those days, so what? Bow and arrow shock or sword shock or club shock, whatever you would call it. Certainly, they never had flashbacks to the horrors that they did, and This is just a sign of modern weakening. Well, next time I want to talk about that. You probably think, for example, think of the uh, in antiquity, the Greek and Roman times, when there were so many great warriors and myths of great warriors, mythical warriors. It's hard to think of those people or those fantasy people as being capable of this kind of weakness. Now, if you were to think of the list that you know of great heroes that we still talk about uh, in those mythical days, who would you think was the most invincible, the most immune to PTSD? One candidate for that would be Hercules, or as the Greeks called him, Hercules is the Roman name, Heracles is what the Greeks called him. Surely uh, a figure like that is perfectly confident that everything he did was just fine. So next week, I'm going to talk about his story, and you may find some of it a little bit startling. So that's it for today, and I'll see you in whatever time it takes me to do the next uh, session of this. So long for now.